Welcome to another great week, an edition of the Ari Goldkind Show. Tonight is going to be a big show, going to be really interesting to you. Let me tell you who our guest for the hour is. Rupa Subramanya is a freelance editor for the National Post. She has written a story that was read coast to coast, rocked a lot of people, ruffled a lot of feathers, and moved the needle on the Trudeau government's vaccine mandates for travel. You'll recall within the last little while, with all the COVID madness, theater, and political science, if you were a Canadian, you wanted to get on a plane, train, or an automobile, and you wanted to go from one province to the next, or you wanted to fly to France for a funeral, unless you were vaccinated, you could not get on a plane. And Rupa has revealed that at the highest level of our governments, there was literally no science behind this. No public health guidance, no data that suggested that this mandate had any place. So no matter what your view is of the issue, no matter whether you're vaxxed or not, no matter whether you're pro-vaccine or anti-COVID vaccine, a conversation that's often mixed up that you're anti-COVID vaccine versus anti-vaccine, Rupa wrote a piece in Common Sense News for the great Barry Weiss. We're going to talk about it with her tonight. And then we're going to talk about what the role is for journalists and journalism in this country, and why certain things fall on freelance journalists to do, in my view, what the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star will be doing. It's a conversation you're really going to enjoy. Rupa and I have chatted in the past. Go on YouTube. Look up a video called Enemy of the State, Tamara Leach, where I'm the guest and I talk to Rupa for 45 minutes about Tamara Leach and the convoy. So you're not going to want to go anywhere. Let's talk about the biggest news just before we get to Rupa of the last couple days, and that's the raid on Mar-a-Lago. That seems to have made people on both sides of the aisle apoplectic for often and obviously predictable reasons. Let me give you my take briefly on the raid at Mar-a-Lago. Now, obviously, the left celebrates it because he's the bad orange man. And obviously, it's my view that how the heck you do a raid on Mar-a-Lago, but you don't do a raid on Joe Biden for being the big guy, or Hunter Biden, not because he's a crack addict, crack addicted idiot, fraudster, failure, shyster. It's because of where the money in dealing with China and the Ukraine went and whether it went to the big guy. So how you can raid Mar-a-Lago without going after Biden speaks to something sort of problematic in the US justice system. But my deeper take on it is that the right is now going apoplectic, saying the Rubicon has been crossed. There's no coming back from this. Merrick Garland, the guy Trump fired or didn't allow to go to the Supreme Court, is now in charge of the DOJ. This is all political. This is the weaponization of politics. This is how you go after your enemies. Well, I'm here to say I'm not so sure the right should be saying that just yet, because it could come back to blow up in their face. Why? As a criminal defense lawyer, as you all know, I don't often talk about my job on here. I get much more into politics. But my day job has some insight here that you may find interesting, particularly depending on your view of the aisle, whether you're right or left. So if the right wants to go on to this culture war to say, this is the DOJ, the FBI, this is inappropriate, this is horrible, this is disgusting, an independent federal judge signed off on the warrant that allowed this to take place at Mar-a-Lago. You don't just get to raid the former president's home unless you can satisfy a federal judge sitting independently that you, the DOJ, the FBI, have the goods, that not only was a crime committed by Donald Trump, but that evidence of that crime would be located at Mar-a-Lago. And you may have seen certain people talking about archives and the preservation of records. I think this goes beyond that. So if you're on the right and you want to say this is illicit, this is improper, this should never happen, this is a kangaroo court, a banana republic, You should probably stay tuned because I would expect when this is all unfurled and unrolled, there has to be, for a judge to have signed off on this, if the judge is nonpartisan, if the judge wasn't part of partisanship, which the way judges are appointed and elected in the United States is a different conversation for a different episode of the Ari Goldkind show. But if there really is something here which led to that judicial authorization / warrant being signed, I don't think the right should be going apoplectic right now. In fact, what's funny about this is that the right was really willing to give up Donald Trump just a few months ago, a few weeks ago, because everybody knows Ron DeSantis is the future of that party. Donald Trump gets beaten again by Joe Biden. Donald Trump is, in my view, the only person walking the face of this earth that would lose to Joe Biden. You could have a chimpanzee run against Joe Biden now, and the chimpanzee would win. So for all of the right-wing commentators to be talking about this like it's the apocalypse, I think it's quite premature. I think you need to stay tuned. And if I'm wrong that this warrant, that this alleged crime is a big nothing burger, then I'm going to agree with the outcry from the right. But as somebody who knows what it takes to get a warrant signed, I just think people should curb their enthusiasm a little bit before you start talking about how the bad orange man is innocent and the far left side, which is behind all of this, doesn't have the goods. Let's move north of the border for just a couple minutes before we get to Rupa. No matter where you live, you're probably concerned about some hot button issues, but the hottest button issue to me is crime. If you can't live in safety and security in a major big city in Canada, which are changing every day given different demographics, different ideologies, given different policies, given the idiocy of certain politicians who all have private security but want to get rid of police for you and me, there was a shooting earlier today in Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto. Trinity Bellwoods Park is the equivalent of the Central Park of Toronto, many would say. It is a park surrounded by residential homes, and it is the park where all the homeless people encamped and people went ballistic to get them out of there. This is a beautiful park for children, families, picnics, and it's a big dog park. For a shooting to happen there tells me that our cities are on the wrong path. As I always say, I've said that for a number of years. Our country is on the wrong path. And if you think I'm being too Toronto-centric, look at the machete attack in Vancouver. Take a look at that person, their history, their name, and ask yourself, is this the Canada that works for everybody when you have a man hacking up people in a rooming house, sending them to the hospital with life-altering injuries? That's not the Canada I know. Now, while it's the Canada many people will celebrate, people who to me are absolutely treasonous and disloyal to this wonderful country, that's the Canada we're moving to. Back in 2 minutes with Rupa, we're going to talk mandates and whether journalists have done their job. Welcome back to the Ari Goldkind Show. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of talking to Rupa Subramanya, and it was a very well-watched interview. We were talking about Tamara Lich, the trucker convoy, and the idiotic prosecution of Tamara Lich as an enemy of the state. Since then, Rupa has put out what I think is one of the most important articles you could probably read if you're a Canadian interested in what's gone on in this country in the last little while. Rupa, great to have you on with me. I'm so happy to see you, and I'm going to introduce your article once we greet each other.
Okay, great to be here, Ari, and what a pleasure to be here with you and talk about my story.
Yes, because what I want to do tonight is when I was a guest on your show a few weeks ago, we talked about sort of my story and what I felt was going wrong in the world. I really want to focus on you tonight. I'm going to stay out of a lot of this. You're my guest, but what you wrote, and let me tell people across the Sirius XM Canada world who aren't familiar with it, we had travel mandates where you couldn't plane, train, or automobile, obviously a John Candy, Steve Martin reference. You couldn't plane, train, or automobile unless you were double vaxxed with the 17 shots that Biden seems to have had last week that didn't work. Your article for Common Sense, which I'm going to ask you about in a second, is called Court Documents Reveal Canada's Travel Ban Had No Scientific Basis. In the days leading up to the mandate, transportation officials were frantically looking for a rationale for it, and they came up short. With no further ado, Rupa, my first two questions to you are, tell us what common sense is, because I know who the great Bari Weiss is. I've loved her since I started watching her writing and appearances on Bill Maher. I don't think many Canadians know who she is, Rupa. Tell us who she is. You're a columnist freelance for the National Post, for Nikkei, but I want you to tell us about Common Sense, how you got there, about who Bari is, what she represents, and tell us about your piece, and take as much time as you want.
Well, Common Sense started off as Bari Weiss's Substack. I first published for them back in February during the truckers' protest, and I wrote something for them, speaking to the protesters and the truckers, and I had a completely different take on what was happening in Ottawa back in February from much of the mainstream media on what they were saying at that time. And it had a huge impact, I believe, and you know, I've just enjoyed working with Bari and my editor Peter Savodnik.
Who is Bari? Let's start. Let's just
Okay,
bring
so
people
who's
into it,
Bari?
because people will
Yeah,
not know who Bari Weiss is,
well,
given that she was deplatformed from the New York Times with that
exactly.
great piece about Twitter being the editor, the masthead of the New York.
Yeah,
Tell
so
people a little bit about her.
well, so Bari Weiss was a former editor of the New York Times, and she quit because she just was really didn't like the editorial process of the new just sort of the wokeism and all of that stuff that was happening at the organization, and she quit. And she had and there's this famous resignation letter by Bari Weiss saying why she quit, and I urge people to read that resignation letter. It's been a couple of years since I've read it, but so I can't remember all of the details, but I urge people to look for it. Just Google Bari Weiss resignation letter and you'll find it. Anyway, she did something incredibly courageous and decided to launch her own platform. She went on Substack and wanted it to be a platform for stories, for content, especially for people who are looking for some kind of a center. There's a lot of polarization in our discussions today, and she's trying to sort of bridge that divide, and I think that's pretty commendable. And they take on the far right, they take on the far left. I would say they're incredibly balanced and fair, and and they look for the stories that matter, and that's what happened here. So I first published, as I mentioned, I first published for them back in February at the height of the truckers protest. I loved what I love my experience with them. It was incredibly professional, and I think my piece had some kind of an impact. It certainly dented what I felt was an incredibly corrosive narrative that was in place at that time, which characterized these individuals as a bunch of white supremacists, insurrectionists, and so on and so forth. And I was happy to do this work for them, and I wanted to continue working for them because I just so enjoyed the professionalism, so enjoyed their professionalism, and it was a great learning experience for me.
And when you talk about that issue, you're talking about the trucker convoy, or as I often call them, Trudeau's versions of the deplorables.
Yeah.
You then, and this is so fascinating to me because I've seen so much of the response on anti-social media to your piece.
Yeah.
In the last week. We're going to get to it in just a moment. We're going to talk about all the crazy responses you get from all these troll accounts where they all say in their profile, candidate for prime minister. Somebody needs to explain to me you know, how all the stupidest responses on Twitter
Yeah.
seem to come from everybody with, you know, the profile, another candidate for prime minister.
Yeah.
Tell people, I think this is the way I want to set it up, Rupa.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people what the mandates were, because I think most people know or have a concept of it,
Mm-hmm.
but tell people what the concepts, the mandates were,
Yeah.
and then tell people about your piece, how they can find it, and we'll get into a discussion about it.
Well, so we had two federal mandates, one that applied to the civil service and one that applied to the transportation sector. So the what I'm referring to in my story is the case related to the federal travel vaccine mandate, that basically said that if you were unvaccinated Canadian or unvaccinated whatever nationality you were, and you were in Canada wishing to board a train or a flight, you couldn't do that because you were unvaccinated. And they even removed the testing requirement for the unvaccinated. Remember, we had a testing requirement in place, and but in October, or the end of October when this went into force, even that was that was not an option for those who chose to remain unvaccinated. So that's the federal travel vaccine mandate. It basically marginalized those who were unvaccinated, and they couldn't board a train or a flight to go see their loved ones, travel, leave the country, even if they wanted to. Say you wanted to denounce your Canadian citizenship and just didn't want anything to do with Canada anymore, and just wanted to get on a plane and head to Florida or something, or seek refugee status in the UK or some other place, you couldn't do that because you couldn't get on a plane. It was pretty draconian. It was very sweeping. And Canada, in a sense, and I've written about this over the last few months, even before the story came out, was essentially an outlier in this regard, because even countries that pursued a zero COVID policy did not marginalize their unvaccinated citizens in this manner. I think you could still get on a plane, you could get on a flight, and domestic travel at least was not as strict, and the restrictions on domestic travel were not as strict and draconian as they were here. And so what was the scientific rationale behind it? And that's the whole point of this story, right? And it was the whole point of the case against the federal government, that these two Canadians, Sean Rickard and Carl Harrison, when they filed a lawsuit against the government, challenged the government's travel vaccine mandate, essentially looking to get answers to this question: what was the scientific rationale for these vaccine mandates, for this particular vaccine mandate? And that's what the cross-examination reveals. You have the Director General of this government panel, essentially secretive. We don't really know who they are.
Is this the COVID recovery panel?
Exactly. They say they're a focal team in coordinating and on the travel vaccine mandate, and that they're fairly important according to their own a description of what they do, but there's no website. We don't know who the members of this team are. We know there are about 20 people in this group, and none of these people have any kind of science background. They're not epidemiologists. They're not infectious diseases specialists. They're not even doctors. And the person who heads this group has an English a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of Toronto. So what exactly is going on here? What is the scientific rationale? On cross-examination, she says PHAC didn't recommend this. Theresa Tam wasn't there recommending this. So who recommended this? Who ultimately made this decision? And when she's pressed on this, she says, well, this is subject to cabinet confidentiality. She repeatedly says that these decisions were made at much senior levels. So, I can't disclose any of this to you. And that's basically where the conversation ends as far as her cross-examination is concerned. And what is intriguing about all of this is that, I mean, there's Ari, I mean, just before I go further on this, there's a lot in the transcripts that I couldn't get into. And just because, I mean, I wanted to focus on the bigger picture here, and I urge people to go through the transcripts and come to their own conclusions. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe a word I say, but read through it yourself and come to your own
So let
conclusion.
me ask you this before we
Yeah,
get further into it, because
yeah,
here's where I see some of the pushback coming to you going, and you're saying to people online, I've seen it, go
yeah,
read for yourself. Don't
yeah.
listen to me. But you know, in Twitter, nobody can read more than 140 or 280 characters because the world has gone lazy.
Right.
Here's where I want to focus. And if you're just joining us, we're talking to Rupa Subramanya, writer for the National Post, freelance, Nikkei, and the author right now that you should go out and find of Court Documents Reveal Canada's Travel Ban Had No Scientific Basis. That's a pretty tempting title. Back to the question I want to ask you, because we're going to get into, Rupa, as
Mm-hmm,
our conversation gets into the weeds, which I like to do, as you
mm-hmm,
know, the
mm-hmm,
devil's in the details, the
mm-hmm,
importance of cross-examination.
mm-hmm,
Is it your conclusion
mm-hmm,
that when cross-examination happened and you didn't get a satisfactory answer,
mm-hmm,
that there may be a satisfactory answer, but it's hidden in cabinet confidentiality? Or is it that there is actually no scientific basis in our government to these mandates? Because those are two drastically different things. We saw how the Emergencies Act bullcrap
mm-hmm,
blew up with Mendocino not having any answer, and the cabinet confidentiality thing blew up. So
mm-hmm.
when people take you on and say, well, you're not telling it straight, you're not telling this, is it that the cross-examination came to a halt and she just said, look, Rupa, not Rupa, but
Yeah,
look, litigants, I
yeah.
can't tell you how the sausage is made? Or is there literally no sausage?
Well, that's a very good question. So the way I would tackle it is that something that affected 5-6 million Canadians, or even more for that matter, if you count their loved ones.
Probably more.
Yeah. Why is this subject to cabinet confidentiality when you're so sure of the science? Remember, when the rest of the world had moved on from the pandemic and every other country out there was saying, these vaccine mandates make no sense. We're just going to dismantle them. It just makes no sense. We're going to move on from the pandemic. Canada kept doubling down on these things. Even when the provinces moved away from it. Ontario and Quebec, Ontario during the protests, in the middle of the truckers' protest, and Quebec, I think, shortly thereafter. Even they were dismantling the vaccine passport system. So, but the federal government, for some reason, kept doubling down on it. How does COVID behave differently on a plane versus a train? Or public transportation. That's what I'm trying to say. And why is it that it was safer for us to the sense of urgency post vaccination? It raises a lot of questions, right? We didn't have these draconian measures before vaccination, but we had these draconian measures post vaccination. So you have to wonder, if vaccines are doing all of these amazing things, and I'm a believer in the vaccines, and I'm triple vaccinated myself, and I do think that if you're vulnerable, if you find yourself in a vulnerable group, you should get vaccinated. But what explains the fact that we went the other way under a scenario where uh, we were supposed to get our lives back?
So let me be precise, because this
Yeah.
is to me what's really interesting about the piece, because then I want to get into some of the participants
Mm-hmm.
of the story, the litigants, because I think that's an important story for people to know. I think what you're saying is, if this is a government that's the servant of the people, not the master of the people, a
Mm-hmm.
scientific rationale, not by educators from Ivy League, not people without public health background, they should simply have been able to come out and say to the public,
Yeah.
here are the benefits, rationales, reasons, data
Yeah.
to support this mandate with actual science, not political science,
Yeah.
not theater. And
Yeah.
this is why I'm curious. Is it your thesis that there were no scientific rationales for the mandates, or
Yeah.
we're just not going to find out about them?
No, I think, I mean, it's so just, I think it's a different way of asking the last question, I think. And I must remember that I'm dealing with a lawyer here. But
Sorry.
look, cabinet confidentiality. I'm going to put the question to you. Why is this subject to cabinet confidentiality? Why? I mean,
Right.
what's the reason? Are we talking about nuclear codes here?
Yeah.
Um, this is, and you've been talking about the science. You've been talking about consulting the experts. We follow the evidence. We follow the science. What on earth does cabinet confidentiality have to do with that?
So let's talk about that because I talked about that earlier this week. There's a case with the Ford government before the Supreme Court that talks about these mandate letters. You saw Mendocino
Mhm.
invoke cabinet confidentiality for the Emergencies Act. This is not a term that should be spread on everything like ketchup.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
the question I'll pose to you now, we only have about 60 seconds before we take a break and then we'll come back and continue.
Mhm, mhm.
But what I have found happens here where you get these people not answering, or they will not withstand cross-examination, or they won't even allow themselves to be asked a question, Rupa,
Mhm.
is you really have a breakdown of trust in public institutions and
Right.
in public health. And you'll remember the biggest criticism of the bad orange man south of the border was that he's decimating public institutions, the rule of law, the public's confidence in the CIA, FBI,
Mhm.
intelligence, the news industry. How is that different when the public is basically hungry to be told, look, if you can justify this, if you can show us the science, we're all ears. Look how many people got vaccinated in Canada.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a danger of the over invocation of governments that view themselves as masters of the people, not
Yeah.
servants? And your point is quite right. We're not talking nuclear codes. We would
Yeah.
not be upset if China,
Yeah.
through YY devices, was hearing Justin Trudeau say, here's the evidence for the mandates, here's
Yeah.
why. Is cabinet confidentiality a concern to you, or is it just one to me?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's well said. And then that's really my point, that I don't think this should be shrouded behind cabinet confidentiality. Again, and I repeat, we're not talking about nuclear codes here. And sorry, your question was
The
what?
dangers of cabinet confidentiality being
Yes,
invoked
yes,
when there
yes.
really aren't
Exactly.
satisfactory
I think
answers.
I think I think they're just I think they're just trying to find an excuse to not be accountable. Not, I mean, but we should know better. I think they're just using this as as a way to so they can avoid being questioned. And that's and I hope that most people realize realize that that's what's happening here. You've had a draconian mandate that affected millions of Canadians, and you're just going to sit back and accept cabinet confidentiality as an explanation for why they're not going to tell you who made this decision, who executed the decision. Was the prime minister himself who made the decision, or was the cabinet as a whole that made the decision? I think we have a right to know. And we also have a right to know, we know that the scientific rationale, at least based on this cross examination, is basically non-existent. There was no uh, Theresa Tam, the top doctor of this country, we often refer to her as the top doctor,
With a big
was
fat raise.
well, yes, but where was she? Where was she in repeated questioning, not just to Jennifer Little of the COVID recovery team, but a bunch of other people, people who meet Theresa Tam on a regular basis, were they were they were saying under cross examination, no, we never raised the federal travel vaccine mandate with her. She hadn't. Theresa Tam did not recommend this. PHAC did not recommend this. So, what exactly is going on? Who exactly recommended the travel vaccine mandate?
So that fascinates me. When we come back in 2 minutes with Rupa Subramanya, we're going to get into some questions that I think the Canadian public will find near and dear to their hearts, not talked about enough. Back in 2 minutes on the Ari Goldkind Show. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Ari Goldkind Show, joined by the fantastic writer Rupa Subramanya. Common Sense, Barry Weiss, talking about the travel mandates. So, Rupa, I have watched or followed some of the blowback to
Mhm.
your piece by, people I consider mouth breathers who actually aren't interested in the truth. They're
Yeah.
interested only in their side. Okay.
Right.
Now, I did a piece yesterday about the Alex Jones verdict, which everybody thinks is about that dumb blowhard. It's actually not. It's about the importance of cross examination. And there's very few engines for the search for truth anymore, other than cross examining people who have all the power and wish to share it with none. Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm going to ask you two questions about the cross examination of the litigants you've actually read the court documents about, and
Mhm.
whether you feel there's enough cross examination in this country. That'll be part one of the question. But part two is one that I don't think you've been asked, but it's a really interesting one to me, and I hope to not take you by surprise. But if I do, tough noogies. You're Rupa Subramanya. You're a freelance writer for the Post. You're writing on Barry Weiss's Substack.
Mhm.
You're writing about a piece that affected 5 to 6 million Canadians that we know about,
Yeah.
maybe many more for a bunch of different reasons.
Exactly.
Why are you writing about this and digging into the federal court's archive and doing what local journalists, or for example, the Globe and Mail, should be doing? The literal raison d'etre to me, and I know I'm probably taking you by surprise here, so you'll forgive me if you don't, I don't really care. But this really bothers me, and I hope you take this with the good humor and spirit I'm asking, is why does this fall into your domain to go be this journalist when if you have a Toronto Star, which is really Canada's national newspaper now, I think it drives the narrative more than anything else. You have the Globe and Mail. Why are they not sitting in on this federal court hearing that's literally digging into why do we have these mandates that are not charter compliant in terms of mobility? And even if the Globe and Mail thinks the mandates are hunky dory,
Mhm.
why is this falling to you? I don't get it. And I know you take this with good humor, but that's what occurs to me. And take all the time you want, because that's the part of this story that really annoys me, is that it was
Well,
written by you.
well, apparently I'm a Russian agent and a terrorist, according to my detractors, and that I'm all of these bad things. No, the reason why it fell to me is because, um, I the way it came to me is that one of the applicants reached out to me and said, "Look, we're fighting this case." I'd read about the case actually. There was a mention of it, I believe, on True North back in April or May, I believe. And I was, I'd seen it and I thought it was interesting. And then one of the applicants reached out to me and said, "Look, we're fighting this in court, and we have a bunch of things that we'd like you to pay attention to this when these things become available." And that was pretty much how it began. But I would say that, look, Ari, here's the thing. I'm a one person operation. I'm a freelancer. Basically, where you see me right now is where I work, and that's my office. And I did this entirely on my own. I went through the transcripts. I called up people. I followed this up since they became available, and I worked really hard. And if I can do it, I feel that any organization with the resources could do it. So there's no excuse for it. I'm taken aback by this myself, that no one's really bothered to uh, go after this, even given the fact that it's now out there. My story has been out there for almost a week, but there's been very little interest by large sections of the mainstream media, barring the National Post, which had a piece today, but they focused on a different aspect of the mandates, which related to exemptions, and also I'm going to call this out: the independent media. Where are the Viva Fries? Where are these people? Why are they not going to town on this? I don't know what's going on.
And so let me ask you, because again, I come at this, Rupa. I look at things very differently. I'm known to not have the same opinion that everybody else does.
Yeah.
I don't even have a problem with the Globe and Mail doing a piece on it and
Yeah.
coming out and saying everything is kosher.
Yeah.
Everything is on the up and up. What
Exactly.
I'm concerned with
Yeah.
is, how do we have a democracy in the traditional sense of the word and
Mm-hmm.
a check on power? And I know you'll take this with good humor again, but I'm interested in the human component of this story, not just what you wrote, but that
Mm-hmm.
it's you that wrote it. Nobody seems to be arguing with what you wrote or the factual underpinnings of it. I mean, heck, it's from the Federal Court of Canada, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
But really, what disturbs me, and look, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it really disturbs me that we live in a country of 30 some million people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you, Rupa, in your home office
Yeah.
that's doing this, when this is not an esoteric story. This is not a story that is about, like, a local school board in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. No offense
Yeah.
to that local school board. As somebody who writes for a living and tries to make a living, aren't there newsrooms that are extraordinarily well funded in this country
Yeah.
that are making decisions,
Yeah.
active editorial decisions,
Yeah.
to be mouthpieces for the Trudeau government?
Well, I can't really tell you what's going on at these news organizations, but let me ask you a question. Why is it that with the truckers' protest, the only piece that said something different from what the mainstream media was saying was my piece? Why did it take a freelance columnist for the National Post? I'm not even a you know journalist in the sense that I don't report on things. I'm a columnist by nature. I
Yeah,
mean,
you're
that's
not at the local car crash where if it bleeds, it leads.
yeah. So that's, people ask me, are you covering this? No, I'm not. That's not how I work. I get an idea, I chase that idea, and I work on that. That's the kind of that's how I describe myself. But why is it that, I mean, for the protests as well? I mean, this is a question I ask myself all the time. Why did it ultimately fall on me to say something that was different?
All right, well,
Why,
I kind of asked you then a question that you yourself
yeah,
have been thinking about.
a movement that was portrayed as being white supremacist, racist. These are a bunch of misogynists. And here I am, 5'3", of South Asian descent. I'm Indian origin.
By the
And
way,
I'm
many truckers share your background. If anybody took a hard look at the realities of trucking in Canada.
yeah, but there were a few of those truckers for sure at the protest, but by and large, I would say that they were white, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Uh,
It's the Seinfeld line now. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
but my point is, even at that time, I started tweeting about the protests, and that's when I came to everybody's attention, because I was dealing with it in a very sarcastic way. Here people were, the mainstream media, the CBC, CTV, all of these guys were not even bothering to engage with the protesters, but they had a narrative in place that they wanted to push as much as possible, and they kept doubling down on this very corrosive narrative. And I, as a resident of the city, and I live pretty much in the heart of what was happening here, I walked around every day. I walked around the first day, and I came home, and I was like, wow, I think everybody's really misjudged what's happening here. They're just slandering these people, but they don't really understand what's going on here. These people are, they're here because they want their voices to be heard. They're not racist. They're not misogynist. They're not insurrectionists. They're just there to make their voices heard. And I kept tweeting about it, and my tweets, I resonated quite widely with lots of people all over the world, in fact. And some of the responses that I would get from my friends in New York and London, and these are journalists themselves at very well-known news organizations, and they would ask me, Rupa, where's the on ground, where's the coverage from the ground? Like, why is it that we're only reading opinion pieces, that these are a bunch of insurrectionists and racists? What is going on?
Deplorables.
Yeah, where's the story here? Like, what's going on here? Can you explain to us? And I said, I have no idea. Like, I'm just a freelance columnist. I'm walking around, and I'm experiencing this in a completely different way. I feel like I'm in an alternate universe. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the mainstream media in Canada, for the most part, misses out on the big stories. In fact, I feel like they're running away from the story that matters. Maybe it's inconvenient to them. Maybe I have no idea. I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole of all kinds of conspiracy theories here, and I'd rather not do that. But it is quite perplexing. And I guess this is it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that they don't want to focus on this. A friend told me today that speaking to a journalist, he said, he asked the journalist, why is it that you guys are not covering this? And he said, well, we're short staffed, we don't have much money, newsrooms are not the same, not the way they used to be, and just no interest in this anymore. It's all about just these quick stories. Let's just get through the news cycle, and then we go on to the next big thing, and that's pretty much it.
Does that not leave a government able to do anything it wants all of the time, with a public not getting a full picture, which last time I checked
Yeah.
was really the whole idea of a press?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you have a government that also gives money to the press to keep them afloat. So you have you have both things going on at the same time, and it's most unfortunate, and it's deeply worrying. It's more than unfortunate. It's deeply worrying because we don't quite know what's going on here. If I hadn't broken the story, if I hadn't written about this for Barry Wise, would we even have known about this?
Well,
It's a
that's
kind of
okay.
actual,
So let me get to that, because that's
yeah.
sort of why I was interested in talking to you about this tonight from that different angle, which
Mhm.
is, the Canadian public were told something. Lives were changed because of it. Okay. Many people got vaccinated because they didn't want to be outcasts in society. They wanted to be able to move about. They trusted what their public health authorities were telling them. What I have seen in terms of the response to your story
Yeah.
is nobody comes out and says you're wrong and there were mandates. People just call you names.
Yeah.
Has there been any demonstrable evidence that you have seen in any response, whether it be from a troll who
Mm-hmm.
says they're a candidate for prime minister,
Mm-hmm.
or they've got various stupid things in their profile,
Mm-hmm.
other than calling you a name?
Yeah.
Has anybody made a scientifically straightforward, nonpartisan, non-tribalistic, cogent response to you to say, Rupa, you're wrong,
Yeah.
and here's the data to suggest why? I mean that to be a short question before I get to my next one.
No, none so far. And as I pointed to you earlier, I'm being called a terrorist, a seditionist. I should go back to where I came from. That I am, I mean, all kinds of different things. I'm a Russian agent, so Putin is putting me up to this. So the federal court documents, apparently, that I'm reporting on is Putin propaganda.
Well, it's like it's Hunter Biden's laptop. Can we call it that? Now,
Um,
let me say, though, that the part of this that I find odd, and remind me that my next question is going to be a Pierre Poilievre question. But I want to just touch upon the names that people are calling you because they choose sides. Are these people, who I consider to be mouth breathers, there's no doubt about it. I said that on your show when we were talking about Tamara Leach,
mm-hmm.
and my views about the prosecution of her and how corrupt and sickening and stupid it was, until a judge put a quick stop to it, almost like he was watching our interview. I was very flattered with that. It's like he was watching you and me talk, a judge I have great respect for. Here's what I want to pose to you as a journalist, because
So are you saying we may have had an impact there?
well, I wish we did, but when I watched his decision, I'm like, I said that to Rupa, I said that to Rupa, I said that to Rupa. But I don't think Judge Goodman watched that interview, but I do know that certain judges do watch some of the things I do. In any event,
Okay.
we have about 5-6 minutes left. I want to get to two things. One,
Mm-hmm.
the people that are criticizing you,
Yeah.
and I've thought a lot about this,
Mm-hmm.
it's because they're on a team. Okay. They're part of the 31% who voted for the guy that is in charge, not part of the 69%, or I think my math is right, whatever. Doesn't matter. But here's my question. Don't they realize that if the teams ever change,
Right.
and it becomes a Pierre Poilievre government, telling those 31% or
Mhm.
100% what they can do with their bodies,
Yeah,
what they must do to get around, what
yeah,
they must do to get a job, how
yeah,
they'll live in a conservative land.
yeah,
Don't those people want there to be some rabble rousers? Not that you're even a rabble rouser. You're looking at federal court transcripts, nothing less rabble rousy
yeah,
than you can come up. Don't those people ever have a brain flash where they go, it doesn't matter that he's in power, Mr. Pretty.
yeah,
If Mr. Pierre Poilievre is in power, or the
yeah,
Bloc Québécois, or the Green Party on some climate change planet in 30
yeah,
years,
yeah.
don't we want more of holding power to account instead of less?
Absolutely.
Why do they miss this point?
I have no idea. This tribalism, I guess. Things have become so incredibly polarized, and people just, stick to their positions, and they don't see that they're just stuck in their echo chambers. That's how I see it, and I've experienced this in my own way in the context of India, where I spent almost a decade being based in India before returning to Canada, and I can tell you it was the same thing. The previous guys did something, and the other guys were making the exact same points that you're making, and then when they came to power, they did what the previous guys did to the other guys, and it just, there's no accountability really. I mean, it's just a system that just degenerates, and
It's also silly to me because as somebody who never fully reveals my own politics, I want you going after Trudeau with the vim and vigor that the Globe and Mail and all the money they still have in their newsroom
yeah,
can do it. I also want you, if there's a conservative government, to go
yeah,
after Pierre Poilievre with the vim and vigor that the
yeah,
Globe and Mail would have in their newsroom. That to me is the only way a democracy works. It's the whole
absolutely,
idea
yeah,
of a check and balance. Let me get to my last question, and I think it's
yeah,
a more positive note. I
hmm,
did pose to you
yeah,
that this shouldn't be something you're writing about. I know you took that in good humor. This should be, to me, the lead story of the Globe, just basically even asking the government if
yeah,
there was a scientific mandate,
yeah,
show us the sauce. It's not secret sauce. It's not the Swiss chalet
yeah,
recipe, okay, which is delicious and nobody can replicate.
hmm,
Here's the point.
hmm,
You did write this piece and you do get blowback from trolls.
yeah,
I want to leave that for a moment. That's actually not so interesting to me. I never respond to trolls. Rupa, you've looked at my account. I've
hmm,
never hit reply once. Now, I
hmm,
don't have many because thankfully people seem to like what I have to say. But even the ones who don't, I
yeah,
don't reply. It's not worth the energy. I don't even read them half the time, okay?
right,
But you did get Pierre Poilievre reading your piece,
hmm,
and he did comment on that.
hmm,
Does that provide some comfort to you as a freelance journalist that
hmm,
the person who may be the next prime minister of this country may, not will, may, because
hmm,
I've often said Mr. Prime Minister Pretty will be prime minister for as long as he wants. I've said that to you.
hmm,
But does that give you some comfort that in the halls of real power,
yeah.
your piece did have an impact?
Um, I'm hoping it did, because look, if the opposition is not able to hold the government to account, then what, begs the question, who does, right? I mean, we have a system in place here. We're a democracy, and yes, I mean, I honestly, I wish Jagmeet Singh had shared my tweet as piece as well. That would have been also nice. I wish someone in the Green Party had shared my piece. It's not just about the conservatives. I just wish, I mean, you don't even have to believe me. Just don't have to call me any name you want, but just go through the freaking court documents, make up your own mind. It is there's a lot of stuff there that is pretty damaging, and to the scientific, the so-called, the fact that there was no scientific rationale to these mandates, and this should not be a partisan issue, I think. In the end, I think this is an issue that affected so many Canadians, and I think political parties of all stripes. I think even if you're a liberal, I know
That's
you're.
what the word means, Rupa. Liberal means the opposite of literally what the far left stands for now. The word liberal, most liberals
Yeah.
don't even know what that word means.
I mean, if you're a free thinking, critical liberal, and part of the Liberal Party, read the piece, go through the court documents, don't take my word on it, and come to your own conclusions about it. The fact is that we're not even the fact that we're not even doing that at this point and just ignoring the story because hoping that it'll die down is not a good look. It really isn't, and it does very little to restore our faith in these institutions. And I'm sorry, but this is, I've been extremely disappointed by the response. I'm glad that some of the conservatives shared my story. I don't want to get into politics here because I want to remain as far away from that as possible. I'm an ideas, not partisanship person, and that's what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the ideas, but everybody really should share it and come to their own conclusions. And if you're not doing that, then there's something seriously wrong with this country.
Well, as somebody who makes a living taking and challenging power to account, I'm glad you did it. I don't think that you should be the only Peter Doocy in the Canadian press room. So that's something that I really appreciate, no matter what your politics are. Rupa Subramanya, freelance writer for the National Post, Nikkei, and a strong tennis enthusiast, which I think deserves a point. Great to have you on. I'm really great. We could continue our conversation on these important topics. And I think it's important, as I've said, and if you've said, if you don't agree with somebody, argue the facts. The fact that you don't like them or you don't like that they're writing about your team says more about you than it ever will Rupa. Have a great week, everybody. If you're listening to us live, we really appreciate it. The Bilal Vakani hour is coming up. If you're listening live and if you're listening to us throughout the week, we always like when you listen to us once, twice, and even 3 times. Rupa, great to have you on, and we will be back next week with a brand new Ari Goldkind show.
Thanks, Ari.